Today, I want to talk to you about fathers. If it's okay, this is just sort of going to be a conversation today. It's okay with you. I want to tell you about my dad and what God did with him, and I want to talk about our Heavenly Father and what He's done for us too. I remember when I was just a young man, and when my first daughter was born, I was 22, I was in the Army, and I didn't know anything about being a father or dad, and I remember holding her in my hands and looking at her face and thinking, what the heck do I do? How do I do it? How do I be a father? And, you know, there's no instruction manual at all for such an important job. There's just really nothing to say. And matter of fact, yesterday I looked up in the dictionary to see what the dictionary said about a father. I used the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the premier dictionary in the Western world. And I was expecting some big, long explanation, you know, some sophisticated thing about fathers. It had about 20 definitions, but here's the first one. A man in relation to his children. That's all it said. A man in relation to his children. And I thought, well, yeah, that's true, but being a father is so much more. So I searched down through the definitions, and I got to this one who says, a man who gives care and protection to someone or something. And I thought, that's really good. That's like my Heavenly Father, isn't it? He gives care and protection. So you're a father, even if you're not a biological father. Many of you are fathers to children somewhere, fathers to daughters and sons. And our Heavenly Father is a father to us. We were adopted actually into His family. And in our family, there are some adopted ones too, and that we take the place of what might have been, but we take the place. God fills us with the ability to take care and be a father of the fatherless. God is Father. One of the definitions is the first person of the Trinity, God, who is the God to the fatherless in each one of us. If your father is gone today, like mine is, and our Father is Him in heaven who takes care of us and watches over us and provides for us. Let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the day to honor fathers, and I take it also as a day to honor you, Lord, and your word and the things that you have done, the glorious things. As we sang this morning, there's nothing better than you. There's no one better than you, Lord, and that is so true. You are our only hope. You are our life. And as we worship you this morning and we read your word, our hope is in you, Lord. Our hope is in your word. And we pray that you would bless us today and have mercy on us for our shortcomings, but take care of us, Lord, as we try to take care of our own children. In Jesus' name, we commit this time. Amen. Okay, so if you're in your Bible, turn to Ephesians 6:23. There's a special instruction for children. And in 6:23 it says, honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long upon the earth. And I thought, you know, it's strange that it didn't say love your mother and your father, but it says honor your mother and your father. I mean, if you think about it, we're supposed to love God, right? And we do. We're supposed to love our neighbors, and we try to do that. And we're supposed to love our enemies too, and we try to do that. But it's hard sometimes. So we're supposed to love our enemies and our neighbor, but it doesn't say love your mother and your father. And I was wondering about that. And of course, we all do love our mothers and fathers. But I was wondering about that. So I did a little research, and it turns out that it seems to me, I'm not going to rehash everything about it, but it just seems to me that honoring your mother and your father, there's a reason for that, but it's not a reward. I used to think when I first read it, well, that's a reward. If you're good to your parents, if you honor your mother and your father, you're going to have a long life on the earth. But you know, that's not true, is it? We know that's not true. We don't necessarily have a long life because we honor our mother and our father. And I'm not saying that God might not bless you for taking care of your parents, for being good to them in their old age and fulfilling that love for them that you have in your heart. I'm not saying that God wouldn't bless you for that. I'm sure that he does. But the instruction is specifically to honor your mother and your father. And it seems like in most cultures in the world, honor their parents and honor the elderly, especially even the Eastern countries like Japan and China. But it's always been a thing that, your parents take care of you when you're little and you're kids and they change your diapers. And then when you grow old, sometimes we take care of our parents, don't we? And that seems like the right thing to do. So one of the reasons is that you need to honor your parents because it's been said that it's actually, I read this from what's his name? Anyway, there's a study. And so the studies show, all of them, many studies show that those people who honor their parents treat God in the same way. Like if you honor your parents, you're more likely to honor God. If you don't honor your parents, then you're less likely to honor God. And we've heard, many times from studies that show that children that grow up in a family without a father are much more likely to go wrong, much more likely to get in trouble, and much more likely to have problems. I think another reason, and this is just my opinion, I remember when I was young, like 16, 17, I did really stupid stuff. And I think as guys, especially guys, when we're young, we do stupid things. And one of the reasons that we're to honor our parents is because so we don't get killed. It's like when your kids are little, you keep them from running in the street. You keep them from jumping off a cliff. You keep them from doing really stupid things when they're little. You teach them. As they grow up, you teach them. And then when we get to be teenagers, we think we know it all, and we stop listening to our mom and dad. And I remember, and I won't go into it, but I just remember some really crazy things. And it's a miracle that I'm not dead. And so, I'm 76 this year. I've lived a long life. And that's no miracle. There's a lot of guys out there. I see some of you guys out there. There's a lot of guys out there that make it into their 70s. The miracle is that I made it to 21. That's the miracle. And I know that's the same for some of you guys because you're laughing. And you gals are laughing, but you're not without guilt either, because when we were young doing stupid things, you were laughing at us and egging us on. And so we did it even more. So honor your parents so you'll make it to 21, and then God will be with you the rest of your life. I thought it might be interesting to take a look at some of the fathers in the Bible and see how they did. And we don't have an instruction manual, so hey, let's look at some fathers in the Bible. That would be instruction, I hope. So the first father was, of course, Adam. How did Adam do as a dad? Well, let's see. He's the first man to sin. He disobeyed the Lord, and then when he got caught, he tried to hide it, and then when he really got caught, he blamed it on Eve, right? So what kind of a dad is that? What do you learn from a dad like that? Let's see how his sons, he had, 3 sons, Cain, Abel, and Shem, I think was the other one. Well, Cain became a murderer, and he killed Abel, so Adam lost 2 of his sons right there, only had 1 left, and, if you're an optimist, you could say, well, he was batting 300. Batting 300 is good in baseball, but it's really not very good if you're a dad, right? It's not really good if you're a father, so we want to do better than Adam. Next dad I looked at was Noah. In Genesis 10:11. What do we learn about Noah? He obeyed God. He lived in a wicked society. He built an ark on dry land, miles from any ocean, and it had never rained ever before that. And so his friends made fun of him, and people made fun of him, and they mocked him, but he stayed strong and he honored God. And he raised a godly family. And he kept them together until they got on the ark. And he was a pretty good dad. In his old age, there were some sins in there in his old age after he got off the ark, and the Bible tells it all. And so he wasn't a perfect man, but he did a pretty good job, I would say. How about Abraham? He's called the father of nations. That would be a really hard job. I mean, it's hard enough to be a father of a couple of kids. If you're the father of nations, that's a lot of pressure. But Abraham did pretty good, and he passed the big test when he offered Isaac, his son, to the Lord. And the Lord provided a lamb, or as we said yesterday, a ram, not a lamb. And anyway, and so he did really good. He was very obedient to God, and he became the father of many nations. But later on in his life, we see that he was disobedient. He didn't fully believe God and trust God for his son. He used his wife's handmaiden to produce a son, and he didn't wait for the son that God had for him. So Abraham, pretty good dad, but not perfect either. Maybe an eight and a half, something like that. We go on down to Moses. Now here's Moses, the great lawgiver. Boy, I would have hated to have Moses as my dad, making the laws, and so my dad was bad enough on the laws. And so, but Moses was this great lawgiver. He had two boys, and when he left on the Exodus to go to Israel, to the promised land, those two boys didn't go with him. They were sent off to be with their mom or something, and then they came along later. The Bible really doesn't say what happened to his two boys, but we do know this, that when it was time for Moses to pass on his mantle, the mantle went to Joshua, not either one of his sons. It is recorded in the Bible that one of his grandsons became the treasurer for King David. So we know that somehow they survived, or at least the family line survived, and God used them, used the grandson. But that's really all we know about his two boys. So Moses, pretty good dad, but again, not without flaws. And the last one I looked at was the father of the prodigal son. I don't know his name. I don't think it's recorded in the Bible. But what a dad he was. When his youngest son came and said, "Hey, Dad, I want my inheritance now. I don't want to wait till you die. You're still too young." And so he gave it to him. And the son, the story, the son went off and squandered it. And then he found himself working for people and feeding the pigs and eating out of the pig's trough. And then he said, "Hey, my dad's servants are better than this, or better off than this." So he prayed, he went back to his dad, and his dad didn't reject him. His dad welcomed him with open arms and blessed him and killed a fatted calf and had a big party for him and welcomed him back. I think of the dads that we looked at, I'd give him a 10. He was a good dad. I'm sure he was not without sin. He was a man. But he was a very good dad to his sons. He didn't judge them. And he welcomed them back with open arms. And he's the one most of all these dads that reminds me of our Father in heaven, right? Who's done the same thing for us. We have been guilty. We have done all sorts of things. We're human. We're made of dust. And we have done things that we need forgiveness for. We're not able to get into heaven on our own. We can't say, "I've been a good person all my life," But God the Father welcomes us and adopts us into his family. And because of our Father in heaven, then we will live forever. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my dad, my earthly dad. My dad was born in 1921. He was 8 years old when the Depression hit. And my grandfather was in the produce business in a little town called Ardmore, Oklahoma. And so when the Depression hit, my grandpa and he had 5 brothers, all of his brothers, they were all in business, and their business was ruined. They all went broke within that year, 1929. And so my granddad had to go to Oklahoma City to get a job in a Safeway store. And then his boys, my dad and my uncle Woody, they went to their grandfather, who we called Paul Harper, who's my great-granddad, and they lived with him during about 2 or 3 years of the Depression, first years of the Depression. Paul Harper was a farmer, and he also took care of the local graveyard in Wilson, Oklahoma. And so my dad grew up as a playground. He and my uncle played in a graveyard. That was their favorite place to play. That was back in the 20s. They didn't have Toys R Us back then, a lot of things like that. My dad was a thrifty man growing up in the Depression, you might imagine. Matter of fact, my dad would make Dave Ramsey look like a spendthrift. He did not let go of a dollar easily. But he taught me how to handle money when I was a kid. When I grew up, the lessons were learned. Earn your own money and save what you get and so on. My dad retired at 55. He had had almost 40 years in with the government, counting his World War II time. And about that same year, it was right in 1 year, my dad and my mom got divorced. He was 55. He bought a house, and he started a business. And so I never knew this about my dad, but he really liked Asian antiques. And I don't know why, because he had never been to Asia. My uncle was stationed over there for a long time. But my dad started a business buying and selling Asian antiques and cars. And he had a rental house where he stored all of his antiques, and the house was packed out, and he had 13 cars in the yard. And I really don't think his neighbors liked him very much at all. But anyway, my dad's secret to success in the antique business was to always buy broken stuff. And so he would buy something broken, he would fix it, and then he had a little antique shop. It was in one of those big antique malls, and he had a space in there where he sold his stuff. So he did that for about 20 years, and then he started getting, into his 70s and so he stopped selling the stuff and closed his shop down. And then he sold his rental house full of furniture and statues and lamps and tables, and he moved it all to his house and to his backyard. And so my dad's house was like a museum. And when I mean that it was full of tables and statues and chairs and every antique you could think of, what I mean is when you walked in the front door, there was a trail, and the stuff was stacked to the ceiling. There was a trail into his kitchen, and the stuff was stacked to the ceiling there. You had to move some stuff off the stove to cook anything. And then there was another trail that went back to his bedroom. So he would go back to his bed when he was tired, and he would just flop over because there wasn't really a lot of room. And so it was just crazy. And so when we went to visit him, we couldn't stay at my dad's house because it was so full of stuff. So we'd have to get a hotel, or sometimes we stayed with my sister, depending on if her kids were there or whatever. And so in my dad's house, there was not a lot of room. My dad had a girlfriend after Mom and he divorced. And that girlfriend he had for about, I think, 25, 30 years, whatever. And she died. My mom remarried, and she was married to my stepdad, Bill, for, I think, 27, 30 years, something like that, a long time. And her husband died. So my mom's husband died, my dad's girlfriend died. And now they're about 93 or 94, something like that. My mom's a couple years younger. So my mom and dad, so when Pam and I, my wife and I would go to visit, and my sister who lived there, we'd go to visit them, we no longer had to visit the two families. We used to have to visit Mom and Bill and Dad and his girlfriend. It was kind of awkward, as you might imagine. But now we could visit Mom and Dad together. And a really weird thing happened is that Mom and Dad kind of started to be friends again. And they actually started dating again. And there's 94, 93, 94. And so my sister and I would get in the car with them to go to the restaurant. And my mom and dad would be in the front seat, and my sister and I would start doing stuff we did like when we were kids, like, "Don't touch me, Dad, she touched me, shut up." And so it was so much fun. So there was a few years of having a lot of fun. And so As my mom began to become closer to Dad again, Mom was a Christian, and she told my sister and me one day, "Your dad is not a Christian." We're going, "What are you talking about? Dad's by now 94, 95, and he's not a Christian. We went to church when we were kids. I remember you dragged us to church every Sunday and all that sort of stuff." And she says, "No, he told me that all those stories in the Bible, he doesn't believe any of them. He just thinks they're a bunch of stories." Okay, so I said, "Okay, Mom, I'll talk to him." So I went to Dad and I said, "Dad, where do you think you're going to go when you die? I mean, you're 94. Grandpa lived to 99, but that is no guarantee." And he says, well, Mike," he says, "I think when I die, I just don't go anywhere. They bury me in the ground and that's it. Your life is over, you're done. No more, it's it. Nothing like that." And I said, "Well, what did you think, Dad, when you took us to church all those years when we were kids?" He said, "Oh, I never believed that stuff. I just went to church because you're supposed to." And he had told us that when he was a teenager, he went up at an altar call and accepted the Lord. He had told my wife that, so we believed that for years. I said, "Wait a minute, Dad, what about the story that you told us that you went up on an altar call when you were a teenager?" He said, "I just went because my friends went. I didn't believe any of that stuff. I just thought it was good to go up there." So that's what he did. So my wife and I started talking. And typically a trip to Oklahoma City would be like Groundhog Day. We'd go there, get caught up again. We'd have to go to a restaurant because you couldn't eat at Dad's house. And so we'd go to a restaurant, but it was noisy and crowded, and Dad was hard of hearing. He had hearing aids, but he didn't wear them. And so we couldn't talk very well, and then we'd stay there for 2 or 3 days, and it'd be over. And so it just was like that every time, the same exact trip. And so my wife, Pam, had a brilliant idea. She said, "Mike, we go there 3 times a year. It's the same every single time. Let's go there for a month." She said, I'll rent us a house. We'll go for a month, and we'll invite your dad to come over and live with us for a month. And that way we'll get out of this routine of Groundhog Day. And so, I don't need it. Anyway, so we did. We rented a house in Oklahoma City, and we went there for a month. And it was kind of awkward at first. We invited Dad over, and Danny knows this story because we prayed about this for so many years. And so we invited Dad over, and you had those awkward moments of nobody talking. And we would turn off the TV just because that was such a distraction. Dad couldn't hear it anyway, so he didn't care. And so we turn off the TV, and sometimes we'd go for like an hour or two and nobody said a word. Then gradually, we'd start talking. And Pam was making whatever he wanted to eat. She made him the best food. I gained 10 pounds that month that we were there. And so Dad loved to eat. I mean, that is one thing he loved. And so we began to have real conversations. And so we did that the first year, and then we did it again the next year. And all my old buddies were praying for Dad. And then the third year we did that. And I would talk to Dad. I would give him the gospel every time. I would tell him the gospel in different ways in case he didn't understand the first way. And we would have these special times where we could have some alone time. And those were wonderful times. Like Dad told me the whole story of World War II. And he spent 5 years there, and he told me stories I never heard before in history, and I love history. And we just had some wonderful talks about when he was a kid growing up, and my great grandfather who took care of the graveyard and all that, and my granddad and all that. And so we had some really great times. So we had done that about 3 years, and then we went home, and then we usually would go in April. Well, we always went in April because that was Dad's birthday, April 22nd. So we'd spend the month of April there. But after the third year, then my sister called and she says, "Mike, I got to go. I'm going to a wedding in Key West, Florida. I'm going to go for about 2 weeks. I'll be gone. Would you guys come out here and watch out for Dad?" Because my sister lived there, and she always took care of Dad. And so I said, okay. And so Pam and I went out there and spent a week with Dad. It was January, and so it's freezing cold, so we couldn't go anywhere. We just stayed in the house. And again, there were awkward moments of silence and stuff like that. But I was out in the garage with a car or something one day, and while we were there, and Pam was in the house talking to Dad, and she said, "Dad, have you reconsidered any of the things that you and Mike talked about?" And he said, "Oh yeah." He said, I became a Christian." And she said, "What?" We'd been there about 3 days. "Why, you didn't tell us? Why didn't you tell us this?" And he said, "Oh, well, I figured you'd ask sooner or later." And so I come in the house, and she goes, "Mike, your dad is a Christian." I go, "What? What are you talking about?" And so, like we are, there's that doubt, right? Is that really true, or are you just pulling my leg? You just telling me that because you don't want me to talk to you anymore? And so Pam said, "Well, let's all sit down and let's pray and thank God that Dad's become a Christian." And I said, "Okay." And so, but before I could start, my dad said, No. I want to pray. Let me pray." And I go, "What? I've never heard you pray in my life." And he prayed. My dad prayed. It seemed like it went on like 10 minutes, and he prayed the most beautiful prayer I had ever heard. And I couldn't remember the words now, but it was just, there was no doubt in my mind that Dad loved God and that Dad had accepted Jesus as his Savior. And we were so happy, and that paid off so much of going and spending that time there. Sometimes you just have to get out of your routine. And I had told Dad, he at one point, he said, "Mike, I would like to believe like you do." He said, "It's, something that it was very desirable, of course, to live forever. That would be something that I would want to do." He said, "But I just can't. I just don't believe it. It just seems too good to be true." I said, "Well, Dad, before I was a Christian, I felt similar to you. And I read in the Bible that God will not only save your life, but he will give you the faith to believe. If you don't have it, he'll give it to you." And so I had prayed with Dad that Dad would have the faith to believe. And he said, "I don't know what happened." He said, "I just woke up one morning and I believed. I believed it." And that's just the way it was. My dad was not a man of many words, being from that generation especially. But God was faithful. And so in my dad's house was a really big mess. But in my dad's house was the Lord. I'd like to take a few minutes and talk about our Heavenly Father's house, because I told my dad, I went through all these scriptures with him so many times and so many others. But let's just take a look at our Heavenly Father's house for a second. John is not talking. Jesus is talking in John 14. So we're going to look at first 5 or 6 scriptures there. But I want to give you a little bit of background. Before Jesus speaks here in John 14, John 13 happened. And John 13 was the chapter where Jesus washed the disciples' feet. You remember that. It was before the Passover, and the disciples were all there together with him, and he took off his robe and began to wash their feet. And of course the disciples were saying, what are you doing, Jesus? So especially Peter. Peter's going, "You're not going to wash my feet, Lord. I should be washing your feet, not you washing my feet." And the Lord said, "Peter, if I don't wash your feet, you will have no part of me." And so then Peter said, "Well, wash me all. Wash my head, wash my chest, wash my arms, wash everything." And Jesus told him, "Well, no, just your feet need to be washed." He said, you guys, he's talking to the disciples, "You guys don't understand what I'm doing right now, but you will understand it in a little while." And so Jesus washed their feet. They were troubled because Jesus told them in chapter 13 that he was leaving. And so the disciples were very troubled. They had been with Jesus now for 3 years. They had gone wherever he went. They had slept where he slept, ate where he ate. They were with him all the time. And now he says, "I'm leaving you guys." And so they're very troubled. They're going, "Jesus, where are you going? Where are you going? And we want to come with you." "No, you can't come with me." And so they are troubled. And in chapter 14, it opens up after those facts that happened in chapter 13. The disciples are very troubled. They know Jesus is leaving them. They don't understand it. And they really don't have any clue of what's about to happen. So in verse 1 of chapter 14, Jesus opens and says, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." So he was telling them, look, you guys, I know that you believe in God, and I know that you're troubled, but just believe me. You're going to be okay. Just believe me in the things that I'm going to tell you. And so I think at that point, if I had been there and I was one of those guys, that would get my attention. I'm troubled. I don't know where he's going. I want to go with him. I can't go. And he says, just believe me. And then he begins to talk to them about his Father's house. He says, in my Father's house, verse 14, chapter 14:2, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. So in this verse, Jesus tells them two things. In my Father's house are many mansions. And that can be translated rooms, or, there's various translations for that and what you look at. But he says, if it were not so, I would have told you. And I was thinking about that. Why did he say that? Well, why did he need to add that in if it were not so? And I thought, well, what if I was sitting there with those guys and he said, in my Father's house are many mansions? I'd go, really? What are they like? How big are they? Are we all going to stay in one? Are we going to, whatever? Is that really true? The Father has mansions. This is the first time they've heard this now. We've all heard it, but this is the first time these guys have heard it. And it's like, when my wife tells me something and I go, really? And she goes, what? You don't believe me? And it's not that, I try to explain to her, no, it's not that I don't believe you, but it just seems so incredible what you're telling me. And so I think that's where they're at. They think, this is so incredible. In our Father's house there are mansions. We're going to go there. And he says, I go there to prepare a place for you. So two things that they never knew before. There's a mansion in their Father's house, and Jesus is going to go prepare a place for them. And so it goes on and it says, verse 3, and if I go, now he's going, but he says to these doubters, if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again. So that's the third thing he's told them that they didn't know before. I will come again and receive you. You're going to receive us to myself, that where I am, you may be also. The fifth thing. So he's telling for the first time that they might have a clue to understand it. I'm going to leave, but I'm coming back again. You can't go with me now, but listen up. I'm coming back again, and I'm going to receive you. I'm not sure if they understood what that meant, but we know what it means. I'm going to receive you as my own, and then that where I am, you might be also. So it answers their questions. They still don't probably understand it, I'm sure, but it answers their questions of why can't we go with you, and we don't know where you're going. And he says, I'm going to go, I'm going to prepare. And that's the same for us, right? Jesus is going for us, and he's going to prepare a room or a mansion or a place. There is a place for every one of us in here. There's a place for us in God's house, in the Father's house. We've all experienced in life times when there was no place for us. Maybe there was no place for us in our family. Maybe we got kicked out, or maybe something happened and there was not a place for us. I can always remember when I was a kid and they picked the sports teams, they picked the baseball guys, and they would take all these guys, and I was the last one. And sometimes it was an odd number, so there was no place for me. And so I did just, because I was the lousiest player, and rightfully so, they didn't pick me. But there have been times in our lives when there was no place for us, but in our Father's house, there is a place for us. And in verse 14 it says, and where I go, you know. This is the sixth thing that he's told them that they didn't know. And the way you know, the seventh thing. So he's telling them, I'm going, and the place that I'm going, you know, and you know the way. And Thomas, you got to love him. Thomas comes back and says to Jesus in verse 5, Lord, we don't know where you're going, and how could we possibly know the way, because we don't even know where you're going. And, Jesus was patient. If it had been me, I might have said, what's wrong with you, Thomas? Aren't you listening to me? I just told you 7 things that you didn't know. I just answered that question, and now you say, where are you going? We don't have a clue. And so Jesus was not like me. Jesus was very patient and loving. And Jesus said in verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except me. And I think this is the first time anyone had heard this. Jesus is the way, so that if he comes back and receives them, if they're with Jesus, they know the way. They're with him, they know the way, they just stick with him. Jesus is the truth. And we know what he meant by that. He just didn't mean I tell the truth. He meant he is the truth. Jesus is the truth. He's the truth of our life. He's the truth in getting in our transition to spiritual life to heaven. If we listen to the truth, then we will know the way, the last thing, and we will have the life, right? Eternal life. My dad realized that he just didn't go to dirt. He was really happy about that. And so was I. I was very happy about that because I wanted to see him there. But there's only, there's only one way, to God, and that's through Jesus Christ. And I think hopefully everybody in this room believes that. We know that is true. The disciples didn't quite understand that. Going back to my dad, I want to tell you about him passing on. He passed on from this life on November 7th. And I was talking to him one day, and it was in January. No, it was October, I guess. It was October in Oklahoma City. They had this big ice storm, and they had it in Texas too. You remember, you probably saw it on the news in Texas when all the windmills didn't work, and they, thousands, hundreds of thousands were without electricity. Well, that same storm was in Oklahoma too. And so my dad's electricity went off, and so I'm in Phoenix, and my sister, that very same week, she slipped in her house, tripped over a coffee table, and got a concussion, and she went to the hospital. So my sister's in the hospital, they're having this ice storm, and Dad's electricity goes off. And normally, my sister would go get him and bring him to her house or whatever, and her electricity was still on. So she arranged for some of her friends to go get Dad and take him to her house because it was freezing cold. And so Dad, being the greatest generation, just, nah, I'm fine. I'll stay here. I want to stay in my house. I don't want to go anywhere. And her friends would say, but you're cold, Mr. Means, you're cold. Nah, I'm fine. I got a blanket, got a jacket. I'm fine. No problem. So that went on for 3 days. 3 days below zero and no electricity. And so my sister's still in the hospital. She was hurt pretty seriously, although she's fully recovered now. But anyway, she's still in the hospital. She feels helpless. She's sending her friends to Dad's house twice a day, once in the morning to give him breakfast and once in the evening to give him dinner, and begging him to come stay at their house, at anywhere, her house, anywhere. My dad, stubborn. I'm fine. I am just fine. I got everything I need. As long as you bring me food, hey, I'm good to go. I'm good to go. And so the next day, I get a call from my sister. She got out of the hospital, and Dad had fallen down. It was night, the lights were off. He was getting out of bed. He had a tray of his dinner, I guess it was, a tray of something. And he tripped, and he fell, and he got caught down between like the dresser and his bed. And there's only like that much space. I mean, it's really not much space in his house. And so he's trapped there, and he lays there for like 6 or 7 hours until they come that evening and find him there. So he goes to the hospital. So a couple days he's in the hospital. I'm talking to him on the phone every day. He goes, I'm fine. I don't even know why I'm here. I want to go home. It's that kind of a thing. And the doctors finally said, well, he got hit when he tripped, he hit his head, but he's going to be fine. He's a tough old bird, and he's going to be okay. And so the doctors told me, he's going to get out tomorrow. We're going to let him out tomorrow. The next day comes, and the doctor called and said, you better come here. Your dad is not going to make it. So when they were taking some liquid off his lungs, and his heart began to beat all erratically, and they couldn't control it. Dad has a pacemaker, but it just was way beyond what it could handle. And so I got on the plane the next day. I'm there and go see Dad. And the hospital is still COVID now, so it's October. By now it's November, early November. And the hospital will only let one person in, and my sister had already been there. And they said, well, you can't come in because your sister's been here, and we only allow one family member. And so they made a deal with us. So they said, if your sister will not come back, then we'll trade you for her, and then you can come in and see your dad. So my sister said, well, you do it, Mike, because I've already spent time with Dad. And so I went to be with him, and I was in the hospital. He had all these tubes, and you know how they are in the hospital. It's pretty bad. And they said, your dad will probably never leave this hospital. And so they, I don't want to go into all the detail, but anyway, they took the tubes out. And then Dad had a will and a trust and everything, and he said clearly in there, and he had told me many times, I don't want to be on any machine. If something happens to me and I'm on a machine and I'm depending on that machine for life, I don't want to be on it. So we honored Dad's wishes, and we took all this stuff off. So they moved him to a hospice, and so I went with him, and that first evening they took the tubes out. The doctor said, he'll probably be dead in 20 minutes. So we were prepared for that. My sister was there, and my nephew was there. He had just happened to be in town visiting his mom. And so they took the tubes out, and 20 minutes went by, and Dad's fine. He's just fine. As a matter of fact, he's talking to us. And he looks up, and he hadn't seen his nephew. He didn't know his nephew was there. And all three of us were in the room. He goes, hi. And he tries to sit up. How are you guys doing? We go, hi, Dad. Are you okay? I'm fine. Nothing wrong with me. I'll be out of here tomorrow, and that sort of thing. And so we moved him over to hospice because he can't stay in the hospital now. And so I spent the night with him. And it was the most wonderful night of my memory with my dad. He couldn't talk all the time because he was very tired. But he would sleep for a while, and then he'd wake up for 5 minutes, and we would talk. And I got to tell him how much I loved him and how much I appreciated him raising me up and into a man and being a fine example for me. And so we talked, mostly I talked when he was awake. And the next morning about 11 o'clock, and I was holding his hand, just talking to him. And I didn't even realize when he passed on. He was just gone. And I was still talking to him. And the nurses came in. One of the nurses came in and said, let me check his pulse. And he was gone. And so my only regret was that I couldn't go with him up to Heaven's Gate and say, see you, Dad. I'll see you here someday. Oh, yeah, I know. I'll see you here someday. But it's just like, the angels took him. And when I realized he was dead, I cried for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, something like I just cried like I'd never cried in my life. It was just, I'd lost my dad, and he had been with me for these 76 years. I had never known a time in my life without a dad. But he was gone. But then something amazing happened. And I can't explain it to you. And I told Jesse, I'm going to try to tell them this, but I don't even know if I can understand it myself. I was filled with more joy than I've ever known in my life, except maybe the day I accepted the Lord. And my sister came, and I was happy. My sister didn't make it until afterwards, and so and I called Pam and I said, he's gone. And she said, how are you? And I said, I'm happy, and I feel guilty because I'm happy. I don't understand it, but I feel happy. And the best I can explain it, I have a verse here, Psalm 35, where it says, weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. But the way that I finally kind of reconciled it to myself, there's certain laws in this world, in the spiritual world and the worldly world, and I think that the law of sorrow is a very strong law. We can be sorrowful about so many things in our life, but the law of joy is so much better. I mean, if I want to say a card game, if you have a king and I have an ace, the king could be sorrow, but the ace is joy. Joy trumps sorrow every single time in our life. if we love the Lord. And I was so happy that I knew that I would see Dad again. I was so happy that God is so faithful, that even when he was about 97, he is saved. And he died, when he died, he was 99 and a half. He had a long life. He did what he wanted to do. He lived, but he accepted the Lord. It took him a while. It took him a long while. It took him a while. He was not a speedy guy, but he made it there. He made it there. And there's nothing. I can't tell you anything that gives me more joy than knowing Dad was there, that Dad will be there. So what about your father and my father? You've been patient with me while I've told you about my dad. You've been patient when I told you about our Father in heaven. You're here today, and let me just read the verse in three verses here, John 14:18. Jesus came back to talk to these guys, and it's in the same talk, but this is later on. Jesus says, "I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you." And I remember telling Dad, he was telling me he didn't believe in hell. And I said, "Dad, maybe you read Dante's Inferno or whatever, and you think, hell is this place of fire." And I said, "It may be. I don't really know. But I know this for sure, that hell is a place without God, and heaven is with God. And you've got to decide, when you pass on into eternity, do you want to be with God, or do you want to be alone?" Jesus promises, "I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. A little while longer, and then the world will see me no more." And that happened, didn't it? A little while, the world sees him no more. "But you will see me, because I live. You will also live." Because Jesus lived, because he rose from the dead, we know that's our guarantee that we will also live. "At that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." And if you take those words and try to explain them, honestly, I can't. But we believe them by faith, don't we? We believe them by faith that Jesus is coming back for us, and we're going to be with him, we're going to be in him, he's going to be in us, and we're going to be with the Father. And there's a place for us there, guaranteed. Let's close with a prayer. And if perchance there's anybody here that doesn't know our Father in heaven, I'm going to pray some words, and you pray these words. If you mean them, then you will be in Christ too. And there will be a place for you also in heaven.